Most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on Save the Nation. Tonight, the moment we have consistently opposed has arrived and remorse is already setting in. The ULEZ expansion is here and affecting hundreds of thousands of motorists across the metropolis in a win for elitist governance and a failure of His Majesty's government. But the Mayor tells us he's merely following the science, echoing ominous pandemic-esque public health narratives. To disagree with him is to disagree with the science, and that would make you a conspiracy theorist and an extremist. But does the science agree with the Mayor? Speaking of the Green Agenda, Michael Gove is about to slash masses of environmentalist EU red tape to unleash Britain's house-building industry. The move could enable a possible 140,000 new homes to be built each year. And with a general election fast approaching, the move could not come soon enough. Incidentally, it was something I suggested as Brexit Opportunities Minister 18 months ago, which would have made 210,000 houses in the period. Plus, a new YouGov poll has suggested that the Labour Party is more trusted than the Tories on immigration and asylum. In fact, on just about every issue other than defence spending. Will the Tory party heed the concerns of the electorate in advance of next year? It could be make or break. State of the Nation starts now. To be joined by an astute panel this evening, criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Breaking news in the last few minutes. Breaking news about the air traffic control failure. It was caused by flight data received by National Air Traffic Services, with both primary and backup systems responding by suspending automatic processing. That is according to Chief Executive of NATS, Martin Rolfe. It caused tens of thousands of airline passengers' flights to be cancelled today due to the knock-on effect. Analysis of flight data shows at least 281 flights were cancelled, and at least in the UK's 6 busiest airports, with Gatwick and Heathrow worst hit. More on this breaking news as we get it. Now, the Mayor of London says he's sorry for anyone who's suffering adverse consequences because of his policies. Speaking to GB News, Sadiq Khan said the expanded ULEZ policy is essential to protect the health of people living in the capital.
Listen, I'm always sorry for anybody who's suffering adverse consequences because of our policies, but at the same time, I've got to be honest with people and say I've been meeting bereaved mums who've lost their children because of air pollution. I've been meeting a paediatrician today who works with mums who are pregnant, suffering the ill consequences because of air pollution, and babies who are born suffering the ill consequences. I've met today a doctor who runs an asthma clinic, but also I visited Great Ormond Street, the inpatient ward at the Children's Evelina Hospital. I met scientists, health practitioners and others. That's why I'm angry that the government's letting down London and the South East.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the Mayor's decision is in poor taste.
People and families are struggling with the cost of living. That's obvious to everyone. And at that time, the Labour Party, the Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer are introducing the ULEZ charge, which is going to hit working families. I don't think that's the right priority. I don't think that's the right thing to do, and I wish they had not done it.
Now, a police officer who was hit by a train last week has died. 46-year-old Sergeant Graham Saville was trying to save a distressed man on the railway tracks in Balderton. Flags across the Nottinghamshire Police Force will now be flown at half-mast as a mark of respect. Nottinghamshire Chief Constable Kate Maynell says his service and sacrifice will never be forgotten. Now, GB News can reveal at least 20,000 people have crossed the English Channel so far this year. Official Home Office figures show that up until yesterday, 19,800 migrants had arrived in small boats. However, GB sources reveal up to 300 migrants being brought into Dover Harbour on Border Force vessels today brings that total so far this year to over 20,000. It's understood they crossed the Channel in at least 6 dinghies. That comes as the government insists it's stopping the boats. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back to Jacob.
In the world of policy, politicians and the electorate could fall into the trap of seeing things perhaps sometimes simplistically through the scope of problems and solutions. But in reality, it's rarely so straightforward. In policy, practically everything is a trade-off, which is why a cost-benefit analysis of every policy is crucial. During the rise of Omicron, SAGE published modelling that suggested its effects could be disastrous. But it emerged that the modelling hadn't taken into account the possibility that Omicron was weaker than the preceding variants. It was simply wrong. The scenarios that the body set out were doom and gloom, but Boris Johnson resisted the pressure to lock down, which came both from SAGE and the Labour Party, and he was vindicated by that decision. He kept Christmas going. The problem with lockdowns was that they were political decisions being treated as scientific decisions. Instead, often with erroneous or misleading data, they led to us doing the wrong thing. And the science may have suggested that lockdowns would help stifle the spread of COVID, but this was not fact, simply an assumption based on modelling, which is in and of itself inherently inaccurate. A scientist will talk of hypothesis, theory and law, whereas the scientist is always assumed to be law. So when people say the science, they think it means law, not the hypothesis or the theory that precedes the proof required for law, and is, of course, not what the scientists themselves claim. Thus, the job of the politician is to assess the costs and benefits along with the probability. They cannot just consider the, quote, science, because that doesn't really exist in the simplistic way that it's put across. The politicians have to consider the array of economic, political and even mental health costs incurred by decisions such as lockdown. And they have to consider the trade-offs. We may have been able to stop the spread of Omicron if we had locked down completely, but that could have made an even greater contribution to inflation, the disruption of supply chains, and other health effects caused not least by delays in the National Health Service. So, what's this got to do with ULEZ? Well, the same applies, as it's finally been expanded into Outer London today. The Mayor of London, at every turn when questioned about his decision to charge hundreds of thousands of the least well-off Londoners £12.50 for every journey they take, has talked about the science, and he's alluded to the alleged 4,000 Londoners dying from air pollution every year, which is a figure that can be easily unpicked, and it turns out not to be a number that you can actually sensibly justify. He presents ULEZ, which he calls a difficult decision, as a scientific one, not a political one. But in fact, it's very much a political decision, even if it will help London's air quality marginally, with an anticipated 0.1% decline in particulates and 1.4% decline in nitrogen oxide. There are other factors to consider, such as the cost of living crisis and that this policy hits the worst off the hardest. And the strategy has been to obstruct criticism. To disagree with Mr. Khan, as I've said, is to disagree with the science. And to disagree with the science is to be a conspiracy theorist and an extremist. So let's look at the science. Pollution is often measured through what is called suspended particulate matter, which refers to fine, solid or liquid particles of smoke, dust or soot suspended in the Earth's atmosphere. It's been linked to various negative health effects. London's rate of suspended particulate matter is 1/40th of its peak in the 19th century. It wasn't ULEZ that got us to this point either, it was innovation. Only about 12% of particulate matter is caused by transport. Pollution is also measured through nitrogen dioxides, which are down 77% over the last 3 decades. Again, not because of ULEZ, but because of innovation. The link between nitrogen dioxide and morbidity isn't entirely clear, but it's obviously not something that you want to breathe in too much of. But what this suggests is that London is actually cleaner than it has been since probably before the Industrial Revolution, let alone since the Industrial Revolution. You won't hear that from the Mayor's office. Perhaps most importantly, though, it seems the Mayor has been quite selective with the science. It's been claimed that an Imperial College London study has suggested that central London ULEZ, which is already in place, reduced nitrogen oxides by 29%. But an academic from the college's environmental research group, which received £80,000 worth of funding from the Mayor's office, simply reviewed the methodology of the report which came from City Hall in the first place. When a team of Imperial College scientists look at the actual data, they suggested ULEZ had reduced nitrogen dioxide by just 3% and that it had had a negligible effect on particulate pollution. Mr. Khan has claimed that pollution-related deaths, as I mentioned earlier, are much higher in outer London, which is why ULEZ is needed to expand. He failed to explain this is largely because outer London's population is much older than that in central London. Mr. Khan and his team have claimed that 90% of cars in outer London are already ULEZ compliant, but the RAC's figures suggest that at least a quarter of cars would be paying the charge. And as we discussed last night, emails between Mr. Khan's deputy and a professor from Queen Mary University showed she asked him to reword a study's findings about central London ULEZ that said, despite these improvements in air quality, there was no evidence of a reduction in the proportion of children with small lungs or asthma symptoms over this period. The point is that this is not as clear-cut as the Mayor has made out, and he has selected the science that suits his agenda. But that is a fundamentally unscientific thing to do. But more than this, it's high time that the Mayor admitted that it's a political, not a scientific, decision. He may tell us that we need to follow the science, but perhaps he should find out what that actually means first. Naturally, I want to hear from you, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of people, the voice of God. And today we asked the great people of Enfield what they thought of the expansion, and the people have spoken.
You had no idea that ULEZ was coming in. We just checked your car registration number and your car is not compliant and you didn't know anything about this.
I can't afford £12.50 because I'm just a carer. Where am I going to get £12.50? If I'm working 3-4 days a week, how am I going to support myself and my children?
I'm a doctor. I'm basically a psychiatrist, but I do take a lot of interest in these pollution matters because I suffer from asthma myself. So, obviously, it's a real problem on busy roads and very congested areas. Something does need to be done. But it's the way I think is being done is a bit autocratic. They should have given more notice, more time for people to adjust.
I don't agree with charging people. If he truly believes the air is polluted, then shouldn't he just be banning cars and be done with it? So it's okay to pollute as long as you pay him money. So it's nothing but a scam, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm joined now by Paul Richards, the writer and Labour parliamentary candidate. Paul, thank you very much for joining me. What is the position of the Labour Party on the extension of ULEZ? Is it supporting the Mayor or is it rather embarrassed by him?
Well, we have a devolved settlement, don't we, Jacob? So the directly elected mayor of London is Sadiq Khan, and he has been elected on a platform of cleaning up London's air, which is what this is all about. I'm very intrigued by your monologue, by the way, where you said London's got the cleanest air now since the Industrial Revolution, which I think is probably true. But one of the main reasons for that is the Conservatives' Clean Air Act in the 1950s, which as a historian you will know all about.
Right,
and when that came in, there were howls of outrage from Conservatives saying this is a terrible restriction on trade and freedom of choice. But immediately deaths by smog dropped away and the air became much cleaner. And this is just the latest iteration of a sensible government policy to clean up the air.
But when the Clean Air Act came in, there was an alternative for heating that was actually cheaper and more efficient because there was an ability to move from coal to gas. So it was a well-thought-through policy implemented at a proportionate time. So it's very different from this policy when you've already had the air getting much cleaner.
But there is an alternative to the particulars that you described in your monologue, and that's that 9/10 of us have cars that don't pump this stuff out in the same quantities. And
well,
so
the RAC disputes that figure. The RAC is saying 25% of cars coming in to London, driving in central London, or even out of London now, don't meet the requirement, and the mayor has focused on a different figure.
The good news is that now the policy is in place, we will start to get real-time data to see what is actually happening to the quality of air. You know, admissions to hospital, for example, we'll be able to start monitoring that quickly. Are kids still going in with the same levels of asthma and bronchitis that we've seen over the last few years? Even premature deaths we will be able to monitor.
Well, the premature deaths figures, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the mayor's always going on about 4,000 premature deaths. Well, it's a key point.
Theoretical, we'll see it in real life.
Well,
that's the good thing about the policy in place. From a policy-making point of view, we can judge it and we can evaluate it.
But the premature deaths figure, we won't, because that's an extrapolation from work that suggests there may be 2.5 days taken off people's life by pollution in London to be balanced against the 49 days of life expectancy increase that they're getting for other reasons. So saying there are 4,000 deaths a year from pollution is fundamentally misleading, isn't it?
Well, I think you can stack up the policy quite clearly that if you don't need a degree in chemistry to know that if there's this horrible stuff being pumped into the air and then you stop doing it or reduce it significantly, the air will be cleaner and our health will be better. That's all Sadiq Khan's trying to do. He's trying to make the air cleaner for everybody that lives in London. That's what the mandate he got from the electorate when he was elected.
But the reason we've got so much being pumped into the air is because of a Labour Party policy, which I'm sure you will remember, of encouraging diesel cars. And now the people who did what the government wanted not that many years ago are finding they're being penalised for having done exactly that. And that's why I think this is unnecessary, because actually these cars are gradually going out of circulation in the vans, cleaner engines are coming in, and therefore the passage of time is cleaning up the air of London as we move away from a Labour, EU and German car manufacturer policy that did a lot of damage.
Well, I'm glad that we're moving past diesel and, you know, whatever mistakes were made then, they're going to be put right now, and ULEZ is part of that. But you're absolutely right. You know, the technology is there. And that's why this ULEZ policy actually affects so few people. And those that it does affect, there's a scrappage scheme to help people, you know, nudge them into getting a cleaner car. And the technology will outstrip the row. You know, there will be the cleaner air available, cleaner technology available for everybody in due course. But you do need these big, bold policies like the smoking ban, like the Clean Air Acts, like cleaning up the rivers. You know, these things do matter. Government does have a lead. You talked earlier, Jacob, about the job of the politician. And part of the job of the politician is to lead public opinion, is to be ahead of where the public is and to show leadership.
I don't disagree with that, but you mentioned
in the first place.
You mentioned nudging people into getting cleaner cars, but you're nudging the least well off. The Jacobs report said that the disabled, the least well off, and children of families with children would be the most affected by this. So isn't that the unfairness of it, that people who are better off probably buy a new car every few years anyway, and therefore they're never affected by these sorts of things? It is the least well off. It is people who are trading, who are providing essential services, who are being hit. It's nurses who may be working antisocial hours, who may be caught both before and after midnight. That's the unfairness of this ill-thought-through policy.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but the poorest people in London don't have cars. They're not driving vehicles.
This is a Jacobs report done for the Mayor of London that said it would hit the disabled, the least well off, and families with children. This isn't me making this up.
Riding around in vans. So, you know, it's not the very poorest. The very poorest are not able to drive anywhere because they can't afford a vehicle. But the people who are using polluting vehicles, of course, are being offered a very generous scrappage scheme, and there's millions still in the scheme available to people, even at this stage of the policy actually being introduced. They can still tap into that and trade up, and in some cases up to £10,000 available, depending on your circumstance. So,
okay,
I really encourage people to go
I would certainly
and look and see what's available now.
Encourage people to get money if the government's giving handouts, or the Mayor of London. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, our very own, our brand new political editor, the great Christopher Hope, had an interview with Mr. Khan today, and we'll be discussing it with our panel in just a moment. Plus, we'll be revealing the results of our Twitter poll. Should Sadiq Khan scrap the expansion of ULEZ? Find out after these messages from our sponsors.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and as I mentioned before the break, we ran a Twitter poll this afternoon, that height of cephalogical sophistication, asking GB News followers if they thought the Mayor of London should scrap the ULEZ expansion, and the results are in. Drum roll, please. 87.4% voted yes, while a mere 12.6% voted no. But I also mentioned that GB News' very own political editor, Christopher Hope, spoke to Sadiq Khan earlier today and quizzed him on the latest news surrounding ULEZ. Here's one of the things the Mayor had to say.
We also now know that one of the most effective ways to reduce air pollution is with the ULEZ. How do we know that? In central London, we've seen a reduction of around 50% of toxicity, nitrogen dioxide.
There's maybe terminological inexactitude. As I mentioned before the break, the Mayor's own report suggested a reduction in nitrogen dioxide of about 29% from ULEZ, but when Imperial College scientists conducted its own report, it concluded the reduction was only about 3%, not 50%. Perhaps rather strangely, when asked, the Mayor also said that he was happy to apologise to all those aggrieved by the latest policy expansion.
Listen, I'm always sorry for anybody who's suffering adverse consequences because of our policies, but at the same time, I've got to be honest with people and say I've been meeting bereaved mums who've lost their children because of air pollution. I've been meeting a paediatrician today who works with mums who are pregnant, suffering the ill consequences because of air pollution, and babies who are born suffering the ill consequences. I've met today a doctor who runs an asthma clinic, but also I visited Great Ormond Street, the inpatient ward at the Children's Evelina Hospital. I met scientists, health practitioners and others. That's why I'm angry that the government's letting down London and the South East.
Well, the Onion came in very useful there. I'm joined now by my panel, the esteemed criminal barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy, do you think this is fair and proportionate?
The whole first 20 minutes of this programme have actually made me feel sad.
Well, particularly that Labour man. I thought he was rather nice, Paul. Did he make you sad?
It was good news, I thought.
Wrong, but good.
ULEZ was initially rolled out by Boris Johnson.
Even Homer nods.
Probably one of the best things Boris Johnson's ever got up to with his green policies. And now it's been absolutely hijacked by central government, who could support this for what it is. It's a great scheme that's worked in Birmingham. It's worked in Bristol. They're not giving it the support it deserves. And I feel like this is Brexit all over again. It's being used to divide.
But just a moment. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, you didn't mention this in your monologue, is against it.
Because it's been completely misrepresented across the board. No wonder it's unpopular. No wonder it is.
But just a moment. The leader, I don't know how you vote, but the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of Khan's Labour Party, is against it. So is there a message there?
No, I think the message is that the popularity of this has diminished because it's being completely represented.
But it could be because it's a bad policy.
So Starmer is a liar.
But then why? I feel that you've used science in a way where it's confirmation bias, in the same way Sadiq Khan could be accused of using science, right? But the fact...
Well, no, actually, I was saying that you shouldn't use science. You've got to accept it's a political decision, and that trying to hide behind science is pretty bogus, and it'd be bogus for me as well as for the Mayor of London.
All he wants is to get these cars off the road. Surely we all want to get these polluting cars off the road.
They'll go off the road in due course anyway.
The scheme is so generous, so generous.
It's not generous.
Every single person with a non-compliant car will get a £2,000 grant towards a new car.
No. If you're a window cleaner, and of course David Lammy said, oh, you don't need a car. What you need to do is go on the tube. With your ladder. How do you do that?
Small business, £5 grand scrappage scheme.
No, it's
not.
5
to 7 grand for a new van.
Yeah. How do you get a new van for that?
I spent last week looking up this because it really annoyed me. I went through Auto Trader. I found so many ULEZ compliant vans for sale under £7,000.
But Amy, if the leader of the Labour Party is against it, if small businesses are against it, if the overwhelming majority of the people of London are against it, there's a message, isn't there?
Well, the message was there, and Sadiq Khan listened to that message, and that's why he upped the scrappage scheme. Can I ask Jacob something? Why is central government not supporting this?
Because it's a dreadful scheme.
It's a dreadful...
Why do they support it in Bristol and Birmingham?
Well, it's a mistake to support in Bristol and Birmingham.
But why is London...
I'm not in favour of these schemes at all. I think they're a real mistake, and they're a war on the motorist that needs to finish.
But the principle is right. The principle is right.
Well, I think...
Clean air.
Clean air
Air
is absolutely right. But you've been getting that anyway by the improvement in the internal combustion engine, which is so much cleaner than it was 40 or 50 years ago, so much cleaner than it was 10 years ago. You don't need to penalise people because the cars and the vans get replaced naturally anyway, and you're just making less well-off people's lives that bit harder. And I think politics is about making people's lives easier, taking the weight off their shoulders.
No, you're not representing it correctly because they're not. There's no penalty here. They don't have to pay the £12.50 a day. We want to get the cars off the road. So
how do you mean they don't have to?
Grant from the scheme, and you'll given £2,000 to get a ULEZ compliant car.
But you can't get a new car for £2,500.
Well, you can.
Again,
but they're over 16 years old.
Yeah, if you're already driving some
point.
clapped-out diesel car, you can trade that in for a £2,000 ULEZ compliant car.
Yes, but that's not going to get you. I mean, it's a help, but that's not going to answer your problem, because getting cars for £2,500 are cars that aren't going to be very good. They're the most likely to be over 16 years old.
Your car's not going to be very good if it's not ULEZ compliant already. It's like 700,000 cars in total. A lot of those people will be parents, and surely they're worried about their children's lungs. Asthma charity, Mums for Lungs, they all support this scheme.
If Sadiq Khan's figures are right, and that 90% of vehicles are already compliant, then why are you really going after the 10% who are the least well off anyway and make marginal difference? We're talking about the report for the Mayor of London, 0.1% reduction in particulates, 1.4% reduction in nitrous oxides. This is trivial.
I watched a committee meeting with a scientist who stood up and said the effects of air pollution are similar to the effects of obesity. They are linked to so many associated chronic conditions, and these in the next 3 years will go up by 500,000 people more unless we eliminate this amount of nitrous, whatever, what is it, nitrogen?
Amy,
I'll give Jerry the final word.
Just say you're right. Do you think Keir Starmer is being honest?
I think he's being a coward.
Or is he being cynical? A coward.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, if Sir Keir's watching, he'd be very welcome to come on to say that he's not a coward, that he is no lily-livered fellow, he is a man of blood and passion. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Coming up, could the woes of the Green Agenda also be behind Britain's housing crisis? Plus, is the Labour Party more trustworthy than the Tories? I don't think so, but apparently in an opinion poll, others do.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So we've had a fair few sunshine and showers across the UK today, and that's going to continue as we go through tonight. And this is all due to this low pressure that's bringing these occlusions south-eastwards across the UK. But looking at the detail for tonight's weather, today's cloud and rain will continue to make its way southeastwards, bringing some heavy showers across the far southeast to start the early hours of Wednesday. But elsewhere, some clear spells, but also a few showers. But with light winds in those clear spells, temperatures will be dropping a little lower than what we saw last night. So a brighter start to Wednesday compared to Tuesday, with more in the way of sunshine around. A few showers already developing across the north and west. And throughout the morning, we'll see that cloud bubbling up, allowing further showers to develop. But these will be most heavy across the northern half of the UK. They'll still feel pretty pleasant in any lengthier sunny spells, especially across the southeast, where we could just creep into the low 20s. Let's have a look at Thursday's weather. Now, generally, it's going to be remaining dry and bright across the north and east, but this area of cloud and rain is going to move in from the southwest, and some of that could be quite heavy, especially along southern counties of England. But looking towards the end of the week and the start of September, it does look like things will start to settle down a little bit, with fewer showers and a bit more in the way of sunshine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Paul. Boris invented it, Shapps encouraged it, Rishi refuses to stop or postpone it. Conservatives are as guilty as Khan for this disaster. Bert, you need to ditch all this modelling rubbish. Well done, Bert. Absolutely spot on. And turn to a more common-sense approach to issues. Pay £12.50 and you can happily pollute London. So it's not a pollution problem, it's just another tax. And Marion, if Steve Khan went after bad landlords and councils whose properties are thick with toxic black mould and infested with vermin, he would see a dramatic reduction in lung disease. Thank you for those. Keep them coming in. I'm not the greatest fan of the radical green agenda, or indeed of the European Union and the laws we retained from it post-Brexit. But what happens when the two of these come together, then gold-plated by Natural England, which is one of the balmier regulators? Well, this very cross-section has become an obstacle to building more houses across the country. This is why the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has slashed the EU legacy laws that enforce what is called nutrient neutrality. The regulations aim to regulate water quality, but have come under fire for being enforced so strictly that they impede housing developers from building much-needed new homes. Apparently, in some cases, even when planning permission has already been granted. Naturally, the move has upset the usual suspects, but such a move could boost house building capability by over 100,000 houses a year. And the government has claimed it could give an £18 billion boost to the economy. And I'm now joined by Norman Baker, the former Lib Dem MP, to discuss this. Norman, thank you for joining me. We haven't got much time, but isn't this sensible? We need more houses and we've just got to get on and build them.
We do need more houses. We need houses in particular for local people and those who are on low incomes. And we've seen very few council houses or housing association properties built in recent decades, actually. And so-called affordable housing is by and large not affordable if you're in the southeast. What we don't need are big 3- and 4-bedroom properties in the countryside for people who might come out from London and don't meet local needs. So it's a question of what kind of housing you want. But in terms of the proposals today, I have to say and I saw this in government, Jacob, the housing industry will always come forward and say, if only we can get rid of some regulations, we will build more houses. Be interesting to confirm exactly how many extant planning permissions there are which have not been built, because what the industry wants to do is build the wrong sort of houses at maximum profit rather than houses people actually want, and that's actually the problem here.
But is it? Because the supply of planning permissions is 4 to 5 years, which with a planning system that can take 20 years to give permission is a perfectly reasonable amount for builders to have. It's a stock level that is typical for house builders across the world. It's not the building up of planning permissions. It's just regulations that have stopped things. That vast swathes of the country were simply told they were not allowed to build because of natural England.
Yeah, I don't accept that that's a real particular bar. I mean, I know the housing industry quite well from my time in government, and I know that they come back time and again and say, if only this particular regulation was shelved or dismissed, we would build more houses, and they don't actually do so. I mean, for example, they made a huge fuss when it was a suggestion when I was there that we should have charging points put into houses, which would have cost an extra £35 only. They made a huge fuss when I was a Home Office Minister about the idea they would have to have some basic security put into houses. He objected to that. They want to maximise their profits. Now, I'm not against profit, but I'm just saying that the government of the day has to take a view on what is sensible for society, and the house builders have got tremendous leverage, and they come back and say, well, look, we'll do what you want, if only you'll get rid of these regulations. So this is yet another example, I think, of what they've been doing for many years.
OK, well, thank you, Norman. We'll have to ask you back on in a couple of years' time to see whether we've got any more houses. But still with me is my panel, criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Jerry, wasn't this one of the silliest obstacles to house building when actually the new houses were having a negligible effect on the nutrient neutrality issue?
Listening to your opening on this, what was the key words? Pollution, water. What's the problem that we have at the moment? Pollution, water. Bring on Fergal Sharkey, who's one of my oldest friends, onto this programme. He used to be the Undertones popular group in the 19...
Used to be an undertaker, did you say?
No. He was a pop star.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
On the moving wireless, Jacob.
Oh, right.
Yes, on the moving...
The undertone.
Yes, the undertone. Yes, I know. Yes. Never mind. We'll tell you later.
All right.
In Braille. But the fact is, what he will say, the water quality in this country is absolutely appalling. Now, the issues rehousing are incredibly complicated. They really are. I'm not going to say there's one way or another of doing it. First thing, we do need more social housing. We really do. Because it's all very well say, yes, build more houses, but it's got to be affordable housing for our kids.
But doesn't that mistake the housing market? That actually whenever you build more houses, you are contributing to the overall market. And the reason house prices are so high is because supply doesn't meet demand. If supply outstretched demand, all prices would fall and housing would become more affordable for everybody. Well, it's a straightforward market solution.
No, actually it's not. If you've got housing associations building houses, if you've got councils building houses... Look, one of the reasons I won my seat in 1983 was because of council house sales, where the government got it horribly wrong. They didn't reinvest that money.
OK, let's get back to the modern age with Amy.
So
on this particular policy.
I'm looking at the strap, and it says unleash house building, but you need an asterisk. Unleash house building at the expense of biodiversity, and that's where I'm a bit uncomfortable.
But it's not affecting biodiversity.
Because if you allow house builders, if you cut that red tape, and they don't have to abide by this. What is it?
It's polluting rivers, I think. Polluting rivers.
At a time when our rivers have never been more polluted, it's a madness.
But is it? Isn't it a distraction? Because the pollution, such as it is coming from farmers, not from new house building.
I think it's coming from both. And if you allow the house builders that little bit of leeway, I think it will end up repaying it. The taxpayer will end up repaying that to unpollute the waters again.
That's an interesting argument for someone who represents a lot of farmers.
No, I mean, I'm looking at this. I don't want to change the regulations on farmers, but that instead of attacking the house builders, if people are really concerned about
this... The house builders make so much profit, they do not need this.
This is relevant. It's not a question of profit, it's a question of is this polluting? And what the house builders do makes almost no difference to nutrient neutrality. If you're really worried about this, you've got to challenge the farmers. I don't want to do this. I back the farmers, and I want us to produce more food and all sorts of things. But this is a distraction because they've seen what's happened in Holland when they try and take on the farmers. It's been an absolute disaster. The farming party has won all sorts of elections from absolutely nowhere, and nobody wants to do that. They're therefore sidling round and saying, well, let's stop a bit of house building. It's entirely the wrong policy.
Well, maybe I just talk raw politics.
Yeah.
I'm not in politics. I didn't have a seat to represent or, trying to fight back for. But the difficulty is, on the one hand, that kids do not have the opportunity of buying their own house.
Indeed. So we've got to build more.
Well, yes, but kids do not have the opportunity, Amy, either, of actually going into... I'm talking about professional people who earn an awful lot of... Well, not an awful lot of money, but a reasonable amount of money, maybe £60,000 or £70,000 a year, which is a lot of money to most people, can't even get into the rental market, which is collapsing. Now, this is a big thing for any government to deal with.
Yes, and
we're not dealing with it.
And it's because there have been reasons for not building that are environmental, they're NIMBYism, they're every opportunity to stop building, and we've just got to sweep it away and build in sensible places.
I think there are more sensible ways to incentivise house builders than by taking away their ability to be within a nicely non-polluting building.
But we're talking 100 to 140,000 houses a year. This has had a real effect.
Well, then why is Greenpeace, why the Green Alliance?
Because they're always against everything. If Greenpeace are against it, it must be the right thing to do. Thank you. Coming up, new polling. They're the dreadful people who went to Rishi's house. They should never be forgiven for that, and they should lose. That was so disgraceful.
And the Home Office.
That was absolutely outrageous, low behaviour. Anyway, coming up, new polling suggests the Labour Party is trusted more than the Conservatives on immigration and asylum. So, will the Tory party, attend to the concerns of the electorate in advance of the election next year?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
we're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. John. Jacob, can't the government bring in legislation that every new build going forward has to have solar panels, heating pumps and a car battery charger on the driveway or outside a block of apartments to help the country towards net zero? Dan, the solution to the housing crisis is not to build more houses and use up our green fields. It's to ban second home ownership. No, it's nonsense, it's not. That's only about 1.5% to 2% of properties. It wouldn't make any difference. Georgina, I live in Thanet, Kent. All the new housing being built on the fields surrounding our once lovely village have a starting price of over £550,000 and they're not selling. Thanet is one of the most impoverished areas in England, so why such expensive housing? It's all very well saying we need more housing when they're not being built at the end of your garden. And Nigel, firmly believe we're seeing the final days of... This must be Nigel Farage sending in messages, because I think this is very much his view. Firmly believe we're seeing the final days of the Conservative Party. If the immigration issue isn't resolved, well, truly the end. We need action. Rishi's obviously bored, otherwise he'd be getting on with the family firm. PM, a vanity project, surely. Well, I'm very flattered if that is Nigel, that he, after his own programme, stays on and watches mine and even sends in messages. If it's another Nigel, thank you to you too. So, who do you trust more on matters of asylum and immigration, Labour or the Conservatives? Well, seeing as just about no one seems to know what the Labour Party's strategy is to combat illegal migration and mass migration more generally, you may think the public at large would opt for the Tory party on these matters. But according to the latest YouGov poll, you would be wrong. Thanks very much to the Times, whose latest polling suggests that voters trust the Labour Party over the Conservatives on almost every issue except for defence spending. Now, I can't pretend to see how we've got to this position, especially as the leader of His Majesty's opposition's main aim in life is apparently to popularise a type of footwear once common in ancient Egypt, but it should serve as a warning to the Tories to heed the concerns of the public and tackle the issues that matter, such as migration, the NHS, and the cost of living crisis in advance of the election next year. Now, I really am delighted this evening to be joined by one of the real experts on opinion polling, the Professor of Politics at Kent University, Matt Goodwin. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. Can you try and enlighten us as to how people can end up preferring a non-existent policy on immigration to one that, even if it isn't working, at least is identifiable and explicable?
Well, the short answer is millions of people out there don't like the current policy on migration. They are blaming the Conservative Party both for record levels of legal migration. We saw those numbers reach 600,000 in recent months, but they're also blaming the Conservatives for what they see as out of control, illegal migration on the southern border. So when you look at this issue overall, Jacob, one of the remarkable things in British politics today is when you say to voters, who do you trust to manage migration? It isn't just that Labour's ahead of the Conservatives. It's that the most popular answer is actually none of them. I don't know who to trust on immigration, say many voters. And this, to me, is a really fragile place for British politics to be when we know many voters care a great deal about this issue, also feel that nobody is really in control of it.
And so is that an opportunity for Rishi Sunak to set out what he can do, to set out his stall and appeal to those voters? Or is it an opportunity for another party could come forward and have clear views? Or is it worse than both of those, that actually people are completely disillusioned and turned off from politics, and it'll be very hard to win them back?
Well, I certainly think it's a lot of the latter, Jacob. I think millions of people are just disillusioned with both left and right on migration. Many voters out there watching this show do not want Britain to be a country of mass migration. And of course, much of this has taken place first under New Labour in the 2000s, and then under a succession of Conservative governments in the 2010s. It was the Conservative Party, of course, which promised to lower overall migration. Boris Johnson in 2019 campaigned to lower migration and to regain control of Britain's borders. And that clearly, very visibly, has not happened over the last 4 years or so. So my concern about British politics today is that unless somebody can get their arms around this issue, unless somebody can lower the overall level and slow the pace of change in this country, then we are going to have a new populist party like the French and the Italians and the Germans. We are going to have perhaps a more divisive, polarized politics, because clearly both of the mainstream parties have failed on this issue of immigration.
And do you think they've failed because there are structures that make it very difficult to do it, such as the European Convention on Human Rights? Or is it actually that there is an elite in this country who don't really want to tackle migration, that they think for economic reasons or even for societal reasons that migration is a good thing, even if their voters don't, and that therefore the structures that are in place continue to allow it to grow?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of all of that, Jacob. I think if you look at the general view in Westminster among the political elite and perhaps a wider cultural and media elite, it is very much that immigration is positive, it is a good thing, and that it should not be questioned. But if you poll voters out there in the country, as I do every week, if you sit in focus groups with voters out there in the country, as I do every week, they will tell you very clearly that they feel that this economy, which is built around cheap labor, which is built around importing hundreds of thousands of workers who, by the way, are not often high skilled, as the government promised they would be, is not working for average British workers. And the evidence on this, Jacob, is very, very clear. If you look at the study.
I absolutely agree with you, and I agree with you very strongly on how pervasive it is that in my own constituency, going round in the summer, people were constantly mentioning migration to me as the big issue. I wish we had longer. I hope you'll come back on again for a longer conversation. You're so well informed on all of this, and it's so valuable to have you. Thank you so much, Matt. But that's all from me. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wooten. Dan, what's coming up on your programme?
Jacob, big day, ULEZ day, so we have a big show with guests from across the spectrum. Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK, Jim Davidson, and the London Conservative mayoral candidate, Susan Hall. She's Sadiq Khan's worst nightmare, isn't she, Jacob?
Well, absolutely, and she's been very clear on ULEZ that she would abolish it if she became the mayor next year.
Indeed she has. And look, I think it's going to make a real difference. The problem was with the last mayoral election, people didn't believe in Sean Bailey. I did. They should have. The result was very close. So I think people need to believe in Susan Hall and believe that she can win, because look at what happened in the by-election, Jacob.
Absolutely, and the political consequences of this are very important, that people won't vote to be cold and poor.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all from me. I'm surprised that Dan hasn't got the view of the Duchess of Sussex on ULEZ. I was hoping that would come up. But that's all from State of the Nation. We're now going to the weather. It's bound to be sunny in Somerset, and I look forward to joining you tomorrow.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So we've had a fair few sunshine and showers across the UK today, and that's going to continue as we go through tonight. And this is all due to this low pressure that's bringing these occlusions southeastwards across the UK. But looking at the detail for tonight's weather, today's cloud and rain will continue to make its way southeastwards, bringing some heavy showers across the far southeast to start the early hours of Wednesday. But elsewhere, some clear